It's Chris Blackhurst with Gavin Patterson at Broadband World Forum. Gavin, how would you describe your leadership style?
I try to convey a challenging leadership style. So one that really tries to get the best out of the people around me, rather than being particularly dictatorial or authoritative in the way we try to get things done. And it's key, I think, to tailor that to an individual's particular needs and experience. So it's about providing challenge, helping individuals and indeed teams come up with the right solution, but being prepared to step in if things aren't going the way that we need them to do.
And going back to when you were a child, I mean, were you always a leader? Were you a leader on the rugby field, or?
Well, I captained my school football team. If that's a sign of leadership, sometimes that isn't always a sign of leadership, I guess. But no, I like to think along the way I was prepared to take challenges, prepared to organise people, to get things moving, and being prepared to take on roles that require responsibility. So I've never shied away from that. No.
Some people, when you get to the very top, it can be quite lonely. Is that your experience?
I mean, people say that, and in many ways it's true, but it does require some explanation. It's lonely in a sense that there's an awful lot, or the many of the decisions you have to take, only you can take.
Yeah.
And the relationship you have with your board, with colleagues across the business, is unique. You have no peers, and your board are there to provide governance and to challenge you there. And it's a different relationship than you've had at any point in your career. So in that respect, it takes a little bit of getting used to. But it isn't lonely in a sense of you are. There's no shortage of advice, and there's no shortage of ideas. What you have to do is really identify the signal from the noise.
But when you take a big decision like should BT buy EE, in the end that comes down to you on your own, sitting there saying, should we or shouldn't we? I mean, that's right, isn't it?
I mean, ultimately, yes. If the CEO doesn't want to do it, it's unusual that he or she is overruled by the board or somebody else. So you do ultimately have that responsibility. You do need to persuade other people. You talk about the EE decision. I was fortunate that the board backed us on that.
Did they come to you? Did colleagues come to you with the idea, or did you wake up one morning and while you were shaving suddenly thought?
It is something, and a few people in the firm had been working on for a while. In fact, going back months and indeed in years at what could happen in the market and how would we respond if that was the case. So we'd considered this a few times, one way or another. The timing was absolutely right to do the deal last year, and that's why we did it.
Some people say that you're not sort of trained for leadership. It's something that is thrust upon you, and you suddenly, oh my God! And there's a whole lot of issues that you have to deal with that you were never equipped or never trained for, and you learn as you go along. Is that your experience?
I think there's some truth in that. I think if you're not drawn to leadership situations or leadership positions, it's evident from a fairly young stage. So, when I'm looking to recruit, I often go back to what happened at school and how an individual responded to situations, to look for early patterns around leadership. Because I think if you haven't got the sort of raw material, it's difficult to develop it. And then I think as you go through your life, not just your career, but situations outside of your job, it's important to not just look at what you're doing today, but look at what's going on around you and try and learn from what others are doing, particularly others who are, for example, ahead of you in the firm, to see how they cope with and handle different situations, and try and consolidate that learning so that later on in life, when you're faced with those sorts of situations, you have some experience to fall back on. But ultimately, if you are, if you don't have the right values, if you don't have a sense of purpose, if you don't have a vision for what you're trying to do with the business, then there's no form of leadership will overcome those sorts of those challenges.
Do you spend your time away from BT? I mean, you're the sort of person who studies textbooks and history books and manuals as to how other people in similar positions to you behaved, or you just not? You just take it on the chin and think, right, this is how I'm going to do it.
In my early career, and indeed sort of even at school, I read leadership books, and I spent time, particularly talking to my father about it. But as I've gone through my career, I've spent less time studying textbooks and more time trying to gain insight and experience from talking to people, not just other CEOs, but ultimately customers, competitors, even politicians.
And how important is work-life balance? I mean, you look very relaxed now, but I mean, your days are always full on, aren't they? I mean,
they are, but work-life balance is critical.
Are there days when you just think,
like everybody does, it's...
I never do. Never ever. No, but seriously, I mean, do you
you do, but it's, stress is one of those things that I know people who are at the beginning of their career who feel their life is very stressful, and I know people who are CEOs who feel as though their life isn't stressful. I think it's it always exists. It's how you handle it, and how you keep a balance in your life that's key.
How do you cope with stress?
Well, I think, there's a couple of things. One is learning to cope with uncertainty is key, and really making sure you understand that you don't have to get every decision right. In fact, you only need to get a handful of the decisions right each year. They need to be the big, important ones.
That's because the city can be a fairly unforgiving place. One decision and it could just...
But not all decisions are equal, and if you get the big ones right, the key to the rest of them is actually, it's more to do with efficiency than getting them right. What you can't do is remain static. You've got to keep moving forwards and course correct. But on the big ones, you've got to get them right. And once you realise that, then actually it's decisiveness and how you make decisions becomes much more important.
Are there moments when you can completely switch off, or is it really never like that? Even with your young family, and even at school dues, you're thinking...
I must confess, I never completely switch off. I think it's the nature of the job, and indeed my particular role. BT is the fabric of society in many ways. Everybody's got an opinion on it. In many ways, sometimes everybody's got a customer story about it, and so it's just, life is one long, continuous feedback loop in that respect.
And if you weren't doing this, are there points when you ever think, what if I'd done that, or I'd taken that turn? Because life's about forks in the road, isn't it? And
it is.
You take a fork and...
I'm in many ways, I feel as I've been a lucky guy. When there've been those discontinuous moments, things have worked out for me. One of them was leaving Proctor Gamble in the late 90s and going into Telewest, which is now part of Virgin Media. That felt like a quite difficult decision at the time. My career in many ways was being marked out for me in Proctor, and if Proctor hadn't moved to Geneva, I'm not sure if I'd have been prompted to make the change. But I look back now and think, I'm extremely grateful for the time I spent at Proctor. I learnt in many ways everything about my own leadership philosophy there, but I'm was delighted to look back on that moment and seen what's happened since, and I've enjoyed every moment.
What's more important in your life, your university degree or Proctor Gamble?
Procter & Gamble. Don't tell Cambridge that.
No, but it's interesting because a lot of people in your position, some people in your position, did not go to university, or certainly the entrepreneurs didn't go to university, or they dropped out, and they actually make a point, a lot of them saying,
I think you can't make generalisations on it, is my attitude. There are people right at the top of BT that didn't go to university. They've been phenomenally successful. Confusing leadership and intellect with education is a common mistake. Cambridge was brilliant for me. It opened my eyes in so many different ways. I learned how to think properly, having studied engineering, but P&G taught me everything I know or needed to know about running a business, a customer-led business, a branded business.
And did you do an MBA, or have you done an MBA?
No, I would have loved to have done an MBA at some point. I feel an urge to study that is, or an itch that has not been completely scratched yet. But every time I was considering going to do it, a new job came along, a new opportunity, and that became more pressing. So, maybe when I retire, I'll go away and do one.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Chris.